Hey, what's up? I'm Sephiros, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about reactor blocks by Native Instruments. I love all things modular, and reactor blocks is a fantastic modular environment, especially once you understand a little bit about the GUI and how to use it efficiently, because at first it can feel a bit slow, a bit clunky. So I'm going to be mainly focusing on how to build a basic patch, how to organize things so that your patches don't get messy and confusing. And I'll show you some third-party blocks that I think are a huge asset to any reactor blocks library. So, let me open up a reactor. And you can get the Reactor 6 player and the bento box you can get the blocks base for free. So you can get started with modular for free with reactor blocks, which is really cool. So here's the environment. And this is a modular environment. I'll start at the top. So right here we have our menu where you can save your racks. Save as will save a rack. You can also save rack as an ensemble. And that means you can load up the ensemble into another patch, I'm pretty sure. You know, your edit functions, copy paste, settings, control rate, sample rate. The sample rate's pretty important. Usually that just defaults to whatever your system's on. And then you have your search browser, and you can open and close it. So to get a little more real estate, you can close that out. This is the 4 different views that you have available. So you have your first view, which has no patch points, and this is just a nice, clean, minimal view where you can move your blocks around and you can manipulate them. This one is the invisible patch points view. So I could patch something into something, and then you can see that if I click on a block, it'll highlight the patch points that go from this block to the other blocks in pink. But if it's a little bit hard to figure out where things are routed, that's when you can go to your front patching view, and then you can see the chords clearly and where they're going. And then one of the most important views is the node-based view, and this is going to be familiar to anyone who's into like node-based patching stuff like Touch Designer, plugins like that. This is a really cool view where it's a little bit easier because the blocks are smaller. You can't actually manipulate the settings on the blocks. This is just for patching. So now we can build a simple patch. So, quick side note, there's also a Reactor 6 effects version, and the effects version is loadable on audio tracks and on Midi tracks after instruments. So that's a really great plugin for using for effects. But what I did was I loaded the instrument version. So what that means is I can play notes on my keyboard, and if you look up here in the Note In plugin, you can see it flash, and that means that it's receiving Midi. So I can go ahead and delete this audio input because I'm going to make a playable, simple playable synth. So how I delete this is, you can see there's no delete button when you right click. I can just select it and hit backspace. It's still not working. So how do I delete? Well, you can go into here and you can delete anything over here with the delete button. So I'll select this in and delete it. And I don't know why it won't let me delete. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Let me make sure I'm on the effects on the instrument version. I am. So not quite sure why that's not deleting, but yeah, I don't know. Let's try deleting let's drag another plugin in and see if I can delete that. Yeah, let me delete that. So I guess this audio in is just there for now. I don't know. Okay, so that is the different patching views. That's very important. Then here at the top middle, you have your browser where you can go in and look at your patches that you've made and saved. So that's very useful. Now over here on the right, we have this really cool function where you can record samples. So you can play samples and record samples. So here you would choose your file destination where you're going to save your audio file, and then you can hit record and then record your patch straight into your file browser of choice. So that's especially useful if you're using Reaktor as a standalone workstation and it's not loaded up into Ableton. If it's loaded up into Ableton, you may as well just record it into Ableton because you're probably working on a track or something. But it's an important feature to know about. Then over here, we have the info button. So if I select the info button so that it's not grayed out, I can hover over things and it'll give me a little text box that tells me what the block does. So this envelope is an envelope generator with 4 stages: attack, decay, sustain, and release, blah, 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 blah. So for a little bit, for some of the more esoteric modules, like what the heck is a sample and hold, right? The bento box sample and hold provides either a sample and hold, a track and hold function when a gate is received in sample and hold mode. The current value of the input signal is held until the next gate hits, etc., etc. So you can learn a lot about modular by just reading these little info boxes. It's a little hard for me to read them because I have a screen that's kind of far away, and one of the main downsides is you can't really zoom in this view, and that's kind of annoying. I would like to be able to zoom in on blocks and zoom out to see the whole patch in this view, but currently that is not an option. So next to this info button, we have the Midi oscillator light, and that'll indicate if Midi's coming in. You can see a little light there. And then this is your output gain right here. So you can adjust your output gain, and this will turn the patch off and on right there. Then you can click the native instrument and it'll show you a little bit of information about your license. Okay, so if we open up our search bar here, this is our browser, and this is where you're going to find all your blocks. So we have player, and that's where you're going to find your native instruments, patches, your other synths like Razor, Form, really cool stuff in here, and obviously your Reaktor stuff, any third-party Reaktor stuff that you have. Then you can also look into your library, and this is just kind of like a narrowed down field for blocks. This is like your Reaktor blocks library. And then files is your entire file browser. So if you have stuff saved elsewhere, you can go and find that. if you want to bring in samples, so you have a sampler block, you can go in here and you can add a location, I believe. Yeah, you have your favorites. You can add to favorites. So I guess if you have a file selected, you can add it to favorites. Let's try. I'll try finding my sample path. Actually, I don't want to get sidetracked. But there's a function in there. So there's these different views. There's the search view. And in the search view, there's no actual search function. Like, you can't actually type in searching, I don't think. But then there's these other views, right? So there's this like list view with the different users, and this is where your blocks presets, you can find those in here as well, and you can add and store. Over here, this is like your kind of Midi center and oscillator control center. Panel sets, not quite sure how to use that. I'll have to check that out. So what I usually do is I just have it on search and library, and I go through these folders to find the blocks that I want to bring in. So you may have seen my other intro to modular tutorial, so this will be a little bit of review. Let's start with the free blocks. So blocks base is going to be the free blocks that you get. So we can go into the bento box here, and let's get an oscillator. Let's get a filter, and let's get a VCA, and an LFO, and an ADSR, and a mix, just in case we want to split the signal and merge it back together. And maybe a CV processor, and maybe a couple sequencers. There's also this cool thing like a crossfade, so you can crossfade between stuff, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. I want to build a pretty simple patch. So if I'm going to build a playable patch first, we're not going to need these sequencers right away, so I'll put these down below on this third row so they're out of the way. And how do I want to organize this? Well, I like to think about signal flow from left to right. So if my signal flow starts with controlling from the keyboard, I could do my note in plugin, which is going to bring my Midi from Ableton into blocks. And then I could put my control source, which is mainly going to be this envelope. And then I could put my oscillator, because I'm going to be controlling the oscillator. And actually I could put the ADSR either before the oscillator or before the filter and VCA. Now the filter and the VCA, you get a slightly different sound if you decide to go VCA after filter or filter before the VCA, like that. So I guess we could have the envelope between these two. And I like to have the kind of the audio sources on the top row, and then underneath I can have some modulation stuff. So I'll do the bento LFO, the CV processor, which I can use to process this LFO, and then the mixer could go after the VCA. Now, instead of patching on this front view like this, what I prefer to do, and what I think is a better approach, it's a little bit more efficient, is to open up the second view. And you can see our organization did not take place here. This is like you have to separately organize this. So I'll do a different layout here. So first I'll put all my blocks around. and we'll start with the note in plugin, and then we'll go oscillator like we did up here. This is our output right here, this little out, and the levels is like just a gain staging device. So we'll go LFO underneath with the CV processor, and then we'll put a mixer somewhere in the end of the chain. We could go filter and then VCA, and our ADSR we could put above or down low. It doesn't really matter. Let's put it kind of in the middle, down low. So now it's time to wire these all together. So the main cool thing about this bottom view is you can box select and move stuff around, and that's a really important technique for working with more dense patches. You want to be able to keep things organized so you know the signal flow, and I think it makes the most sense to flow from left to right. So yeah, unless you speak Japanese or something and you're used to reading right to left. So now we can wire this up. So it's pretty self-explanatory. The inputs are yellow and the outputs are white, and you can take an output and go into an input. So we'll go from the pitch into the pitch. We'll take the gate from our Ableton keyboard and go into the gate on the envelope so that we're triggering the envelope when we hit a key. We then want to take the output of this envelope and use it to control the mod A on our VCA. So the VCA is going to control the volume. VCA stands for voltage controlled amplifier. And this is going to allow us to control the volume of our signal. Now, it's nice to have a separate envelope for our filter. And the reason why I waited until after I started patching to duplicate that is because you can see that it kept my connections to the gate. So that's a little bit of a time saver there. If you wait till after you're patching to start duplicating modulation and oscillators, like we could duplicate this oscillator now, and it's already routed up. So if I just delete that, I can then send this second envelope into the VCA's mod A. So now we can modulate, I'm sorry, not the VCA, the VCF, which is, or the SVF, which is the filter. So mod A from the second envelope to control the filter cutoff to make it go wah wah. And then where's our audio coming from? Well, it's coming from the oscillator. So we want to take the output, and if you look, we have an output, and then we have sine, saw, triangle, pulse, and oscillator sync outputs. So we have a bunch of sweet outputs on this. We'll take the regular output and go into the input on the VCA, or on the filter. And then take the audio out of the filter, go into the VCA, take the audio out of the VCA and go into input 1 of our mixer, and then output from the mixer into this level control and then into our output. So now we'll be able to get sound. So if I minimize this view here, what I want to do is quickly organize this top view again. So with this envelope, I'm going to get confused as to which envelope goes to what. So an easy way to keep this organized is if I click on this, you can see that this envelope is routed in the VCA. If I click on this one, it's routed into the filter. So I'll just put this one before the filter so I know that this one goes with the filter and this one goes with the VCA. So now I can hide my patch cord so everything's a little bit cleaner, and we just have to set up our modulation, because if I hit a note in, you can see the notes coming in, and you can see this little A flashing on the mod A. So what I have to do is adjust the amount of modulation now. This is like a little built-in attenuator. It's actually a built-in attenuverter. So similar to this voltage processor, there's a knob that goes left or right. Up here, if you click, you can see per knob you have an attenuverter, which means you can attenuate or invert the range of modulation you want per knob. And so what that's doing is it's taking the modulation that's going into the mod A input and allowing you to adjust the amount on a per knob basis, which is really nice. In hardware modular, you have to have attenuverter modules, and then some modules have built-in attenuverters, but this is a much cleaner approach. So we have modulation coming from our envelopes, and all we have to do to start getting sound out of this patch is to take this VCA, go to the mod A and click the A, and then adjust the modulation to control the volume knob that much. And then we also want to turn up channel 1 of our mixer because that's where it's going. So you can see now we're getting a tone. So with this oscillator is very cool. We can change the wave shape. So it's like a wavetable. We also have some other neat controls like pulse width. So I think if we want to build like a Moog style synth, we're going to want a couple more oscillators. And you can see everything's already nicely routed to this oscillator. So I can duplicate this, but first I'm going to do the pitch to the filter. So I'll take the keyboard pitch from Ableton into the filter. That way the filter cutoff will track. And if I look at the filter, there's this little keyboard icon here. And if I turn this knob up to 100%, now it'll track in key. So if I go to a square wave, so you can see the filter is nicely tracking. So let's go back into the patch now, and now that we have everything routed up, what else could we do before we start duplicating this oscillator? Well, it might be nice to have the LFO control the mod A input. It might be nice to have the gate of our keyboard control the reset of the LFO. So the LFO resets, it restarts every time we hit a note. And I think that's good enough to duplicate this oscillator a couple times. So instead of just duplicating the oscillator a couple times, I'll give the oscillator its own filter in VCA. So I can either right click and hit duplicate, or I can select, and I think I can command D. Oh, no, I can't. Can I control drag? Yes. So you can control drag. I think on Mac that would be like an alt drag. And let's do that another time. So select these three and control drag. So now we have a 3 oscillator synth. And I want to take the output of our second and third lanes and go into 2 and 3 of our mixer. And then over here we're going to be a little bit discombobulated, so I'll just get this back into organization mode. So I can click the chord layout again and just look and see where we're at. So we have 3 VCAs. Let's put this VCA underneath, this VCA underneath, we have 3 filters. So let's put this filter underneath and this filter underneath. And I'll show you another easy thing that's, it's easy to overlook this, but it's very important for organization. We can go to this oscillator and click right here. And if we double click, we can rename it. So I'll call that oscillator 1. Filter 1. VCA 1. And obviously oscillator 2. Filter 2. VCA 2. And et cetera, et cetera. So now when I look at my patching view, I can tell which one goes with which one. So oscillator 1 will have on the bottom, I suppose. And then VCA 1 can go after that. And the filter 1 can go before the VCA 1. And we're using the same envelope for all of them. So that's when I might put this envelope over here on the bottom. We can move the LFO to the bottom. We can move the note back into the top so that we have everything lined up here. And let me just move some of this stuff. So filter 3, we'll put this over here. VCA 3, oscillator 2, VCA 2, filter 2. Put the other ADSR down here. Put all our control voltage down on the bottom. Put our ADSRs together. So now I can hide these patch cords and see everything nice and organized. So now we can start to play this patch. First thing I'm going to want to do is turn up the mix of 2 and 3. And we can start to modulate our filters, and let's do like subtly different amounts on each oscillator. We can pitch them up, so maybe one's up an octave. And we could detune these down on the bottom, like one's 4 cents flat and one's 4 cents sharp, or 7. So if you remember, we routed our mod A to the oscillators mod A. So now we can modulate some of these oscillators. So I think for these 2 sub-oscillator Reese, we'll modulate the pulse width a little bit. That might be nice. And I could do maybe the opposite rotation on the other one. Another thing we can do is up here on our note in we have an option for legato, so we could turn the legato on and the glide. It could be nice to have a bit of noise if we're going for this Moog style setup. So I think a sample and hold can be used for noise. Let's see, utility. And there's no free noise. Let's see if we can get some noise out of the sample and hold bento. So put that over here and let's just look at this. in/noise. So I'm guessing if I turn this to the right, then we have noise instead. And let's take our output. Let's see if this will give us some noise. Go into the fourth input on our mixer and just check this. Turn these down. Yeah, so we have noise. I had to click. I clicked something here. I think I clicked the gate and that just like started the noise. Let's listen to this and mess with it a little. Okay, so this button switches it from sample and hold to the noise mode. And this bipolar or unipolar basically creates a DC offset. So it's either on the positive side of the waveform or bipolar, which means it's on positive and negative. So I think let's mess with the slew, see if we can get some different tones out of the noise. All right, so what we're going to want to do is duplicate one of these VCAs and use the VCA. We'll take the audio in, out, and we can take the audio from our noise and then go into the input. And if you put an input into an input that already has an input routed into it, it'll replace that input. So now we have our noise, and we could duplicate one of our ADSRs and use that to control the mod A input of our VCA. So we have our own ADSR, and I'll call this noise ADSR. And now we can have our noise ADSR be next to our noise. So let's find our noise ADSR right here, and we'll put it before the noise. And then we'll find the VCA. So I want to label the VCA noise VCA. That way I know which one's which over here. And noise VCA, boom, put it after the noise. So now, if I open up this mixer, might be nice to have our own filter for that noise as well. So let's go in and get the filter and call this noise filter. and take the audio in from the VCA and go into our input. So now we have a filter on our noise, and we'll take the ADSR that we're using to control all the filters, and we'll call this filter envelope, and we'll take the output of our filter envelope and control the filter of the noise as well with the mod A. So now on our filter, and now it's just a matter of shaping our envelopes. So we could have like a nice sharp attack to the noise, but then we could have the filter, maybe we'll have a nice release. So this filter has different modes: low pass, band pass, and high pass. I think it would be nice to have a high pass on that noise. So we'll take the input from our filter and go into another filter for the noise, and then into our input of the mixer. And for this one, we'll call it high pass noise HP, and we'll put that in the right place, and then switch this to a high pass and set it at like 200 hertz, just so we don't have that low noise. And then we have our filter envelope here. If you click these, you can change the slope of the ADSR. So the volume shape, that's also useful. Nice release on there. Sharp attack, sharp decay, maybe exponential. So what's the point, right? Why not just open up a Moog emulator synth and go to town? Well, there's some pretty cool things you can do in here that you can't do in those other synths, even with just this free stuff. So let's do some of that. So remember we had an LFO, and our LFO is modulating some things, right? If we click on it, we can see it's modulating the mod amount. But we can modulate a bunch more stuff with this LFO, or we can have a totally different LFO. So let's have another LFO, and we'll call this I'm going to call it mod, because we're going to use this to modulate the modulation. And this is probably one of the most important concepts in modular, is to start modulating your modulation. So we can take the LFO and modulate our main LFO. We can take it and modulate our ADSRs. So go into the mod A of our envelopes. And what else could we modulate? We could modulate the mixer, because the mixer is like 4 VCAs. It has a mod input. So if we go over here to our mixer, mod A, we also have secondary mod inputs on our oscillators, so we can modulate the oscillators. And we could have a fourth oscillator that we use as a modulation source as well. So maybe we duplicate this top oscillator, and we call this mod audio rate mod. And we could start off without modulating it. We will want it to key track, but we can put it down here with our modulation stuff. So with this oscillator, we can use this to modulate things like our filters. Let's try doing some filter modulation. So we have our noise filter. Let's take the audio rate out and go into the FM input on our filter. We could try doing the same for our other filters. So let's do that for all our filters. So now we're going to be sending audio rate stuff into the FM input of our filters. So now we can get some much more complex timbres. Let's look for our mod audio rate mod. So we'll put this down with our modulation stuff. And our mod, we can click and see where it's going. So it's going to a bunch of stuff. Let's first dial in some of this LFO. So if you remember, I'm LFOing the main LFO. And here's our main LFO. So I'll call that main LFO, and we can start to modulate the speed of this LFO. I can open up the chord view and see where this LFO is going. So the LFO is going to several places. It looks like it's mainly going to our oscillators. So we could maybe modulate some of the shape, we can modulate the shape of the oscillators. And if you remember, we also sent that mod LFO to the envelopes. So let's modulate the sustain and attack of the envelopes. So you see you have different modes on the LFO, and I set it to this random sample and hold mode. And then if I turn up the shape, this is like a slew. And what a slew does is it kind of smooths the transition between points. So instead of it snapping hardcore to the different value, it's going to kind of morph smoothly into it. Okay, so now we have a more alive sounding patch because we're modulating the modulation. And so you can see every note is attacking a little bit different because we're modulating these ADSRs. So let's start to build a little bit of an arpeggio so that we don't have to play it. It's nice to have something going in the background. So let's just do a quick little arpeggio. You see there, I ran into the problem of reactor blocks. So if you want to patch something on this patch view and you can't zoom, it becomes a pain. I want this noise filter to key track, so instead I'll just open up this view and find our noise filter and patch the pitch easily from our note in so that our filter is tracking. Now remember, we routed that fourth oscillator into our filters to do some FM. So now let's start to engage the FM by either turning up this FM knob, or we could modulate the amount of FM being applied to the filter with an ADSR. So let's go in and add another ADSR, and we'll call this filter FM amount. We'll take our gate from the sequencer, which is our DAW, and then we can take the out and patch it into the mod input. Let's do mod B. Into mod B of our various filters. So now we have another envelope that we can use to control the modulation, the frequency modulation of our filters. And we'll find that, and I'll just put it down here. Anytime stuff starts to go off to the right of the screen, rather than scroll, I prefer to have a vertical view like this. I just think it's a little bit quicker with the mouse to just scroll up and down. Now that's different if you have like a trackpad or whatever, but for me, that's how I like to have it. So we can now start to adjust the amount of modulation of our FM source on our filters. So now, with our audio rate modulation oscillator, we could maybe take this main LFO out and send it into the audio rate modulation oscillator into the mod input and start to modulate something like the shape. So now we're modulating the shape. If I put it up in the middle, then it'll go to either side. And we're also modulating the pulse width of it a little bit. And if we tune this, we're going to get different timbres in that filter FM. So it could be cool to modulate the LFO that's modulating our other stuff. So modulating modulators that are modulating modulators. So let's get an LFO, and I'll take the LFO and go into our mod and call that LFO mod. So where's our mod? Here it is. So I'll put it down lower. So I'll put the mod next to the mod, and let's modulate the kind of the shape and the speed. And let's have this mod be very slow and maybe just like a triangle. So I feel like it could be cool to modulate the pitch with this same slow LFO. So let's go into the FM input, which is frequency modulation. So, but it's not just for audio rate frequency modulation. You can use the FM input as like a secondary pitch modulation source. And we can go into the FM input of our oscillators and just kind of give them a little bit of pitch wobble, and it'll make it sound a little more subtle. So that's a pretty complex sound. Sounds pretty analog, and that has to do a lot with all the kind of the subtle modulations, the FM on the filter. So let's record some of this now. So yeah, there's a bunch of variations. And if you noticed during that kind of performance, oh, here's a cool shortcut. If you open up the audio and expand this and then pull this out, it's a lot easier. So yeah, click this zoom with the Z. So yeah, tons of different variation in here. Really like this end part. So yeah, that's plenty of sound design to like write a tune off of. There's like some cool melody stuff I could chop up. There's some nice single notes I could use to harmonize with that melody. And yeah, that's all just the free blocks. So there's blocks you can buy. If I open up Reaktor, there's all these other blocks, like super crazy stuff. I'm just gonna save this. Call it modular Moog style. And then real quick before you go, I'll just show you some of these cool blocks, or before I go. So check this out. So the first thing I would recommend is the Euro React free bundle. And this has like some really cool things like this tape delay and the wavetable distortion. Tons of other stuff, cool oscillators, this Rungler oscillator. These oscillators are really cool, much deeper than what I was just showing you. And then that's the Euro React free bundle. Then there's a Euro React that you can pay for that has even more crazy stuff in it. A lot of cool stuff in here. Some of these oscillators, the comb oscillator, you got like clap oscillators, drum oscillators, all kinds of cool stuff. And then if you want to get a little bit more modern with it, so the Euro React, that's through Unfiltered Audio. And then there's this creator called Toybox. And Toybox has some really cool packs that go on sale every once in a while. And these are really cool. Like the there's like a wavetable oscillator that's really cool. They have like a granular sampler in their sampler pack, and that's really nice. You can get this crazy granular plugin. So imagine having all that modulation capability and cool interactions and as many oscillators as you want in the environment, and then be able to have that with granular synthesis, wavetable synthesis. There's also polyphonic patches in the synth pack. So you can have like polyphonic envelopes, so you can get crazy polysynths going. So yeah, Toybox and Unfiltered Audio Euro React. Those are some really cool bonus packs that you can get for blocks that really open it up to something that's much more, it's like serum on steroids type deal. Really cool stuff to be had there. So yeah, if you like this video, like and subscribe, comment down below any questions or comments. And yeah, until next time, I'm Sephiros. Big up and peace.